When Sir Rod released his independent report, our government invited the community to comment on his recommendations. And our response, which will be ready for release at the end of the year, will go further than the Eddington report. In fact, it will go much further than the Eddington report. It will not just be a major transport plan for Melbourne's east and west, but also for our northern and southeastern suburbs and for regional Victoria. And that's why I've been calling our response in many of the media conferences that I've done on this, Eddington Plus. Meeting our transport challenges, the report that was released in 2006 really provided the foundations for much of the plan. And I say that because it strengthened our existing road and public transport networks, and it also initiated what became known as the Eddington Report. But our next step is to really build for the future by expanding our transport network with new public transport services as well as new roads for our rapidly growing community. And I think there's one part of Rod Eddington's report which is unarguable, and that is doing nothing is not an option. Victoria's population grew by more than 1 million people in the last 20 years, but by far the fastest growth in both percentage terms and in aggregate terms was in the last 5 years, between 2003 and 2007. In those 5 years, Victoria's population jumped, as you can see there, by 353,596 people. And to put that in perspective, as you can see, that's more than double, well over double, the population growth in the years from 1993 to 1997. Victoria is growing now at above the national rate of growth. And you can compare that, and I know it's a point that Bernard Salt will have made to you this morning, compare it to the 1990s when people were leaving the state in droves. Between 1999 and 2008, the total number of vehicle kilometres travelled on Melbourne's roads increased by 13.8%. And that growth normally tracks population growth. But over the same period, have a look at that. Tram patronage grew by 28.5% from 120 million to 154 million, and metropolitan train patronage jumped by 63%. And in raw figures, that 63% translates to an extra 72 million passenger trips a year on our metropolitan trains. We are carrying more people than we've ever carried before. And the only comparable period you'll see there is back there, and for those of you with sort of long memories, and my dad always tells me about that, the immediate post-war years, that was petrol rationing. And, federal elections were won and lost on petrol rationing. So the last time we carried as many people on the train network was in the days when you basically couldn't drive your car because of petrol rationing. It's worth noting also that the patronage, as I said, on V-line trains and buses has also increased dramatically, rising by more than 64% since the 1990s. When I became Premier, I said that I listed a number of priorities, and I said that taking decisive action in terms of public transport was one of the key priorities. Over the last year, we've done a lot of things. We've fast-tracked the delivery of some pre-existing transport commitments. We've also announced a number of new initiatives, significant initiatives. Over the last year, we've ordered 36 extra V-line carriages and 8 extra metropolitan trains. We've developed, I might say, with the help and support of the RACV, a new $112 million road congestion plan to ease peak hour pressure. Not all of the things in that are popular. Some of them are controversial, some of the changes in relation to clearways. But there's also a lot of support there for things like extra bike paths and opening up those opportunities for people who want to ride into the city. We've introduced free early bird travel, pre-7 a.m, and people are voting with their feet and using that service. We've opened up the public transport tender to international competition, and within the next few days, Minister Koski will announce the shortlist of the final tenderers in the trams and the trains. We've launched a new bus service. I don't know if you've used it. It's fantastic for anyone who works in Parkville, for university students from North Melbourne Station to Parkville. The buses run every 3 minutes. It's carrying 2,500 passengers a day. We've changed the Metropolitan Trains timetable. It is now delivering 200 new services a week. We've also commenced work on the $52 million Clifton Hill Rail project. That's to duplicate that. There's only a single line that's ever gone over the creek there. and that'll enable up to 6 extra Hurstbridge and Epping line trains to run in the morning peak. And in the budget just a few months ago, we provided $10.5 million to plan for the South Morang rail extension, $153 million for the Westall rail upgrade, $93 million for the third rail line at Laverton, $110 million to duplicate the Princess Highway West between Warren Ponds and Winchelsea, $65 million to connect the Geelong Ring Road to the Princess Highway, and $40 million to build the new duplicated section of the Western Highway from Melton to Bacchus Marsh. On top of all of that, we opened the Dandenong Bypass 12 months ahead of schedule. Eastlink's been opened, $2.5 billion, 5 months ahead of schedule. And in the northeast of the state, we've just signed an historic agreement with the Australian Rail Track Corporation and the Rudd government, which will see $501 million spent standardising the rail gauge in the northeast of the state and improving passenger services, which will be fantastic on that area. The Transport Plan for Victoria will mark a new chapter in our state's transport system. It will tackle congestion in the short, medium and long term. It will take a statewide view of our transport and infrastructure needs. It will also put in place a longer term freight strategy, and it will also coordinate urban development and transport infrastructure. And that last point is very important because the way our city grows is directly connected to our transport infrastructure and the way we travel. And the way we travel, of course, is then directly connected to the quality of our lives and the productivity of our industries. Some of the short and medium-term actions we developed for the Transport Plan for Victoria will be announced before the end of the year. When we're talking about long-term projects, we're talking about projects of a size and scope which would be comparable, for example, to Eastlink, comparable, for example, to Channel Deepening, the Port of Melbourne. Projects which will have to go through feasibility studies and also the necessary environmental and planning processes. And I guess the point I want to make tonight, I know everybody's always impatient for big projects, but projects of that size and scale and magnitude can't be rushed. The better the pre-planning, the better the end result. You don't go out one day and announce an in-principle commitment to a $5 billion project and then start digging the very next day. Projects of significant size and scope take time. The City Loop, for example, took 13 years from final project go-ahead to completion. CityLink took 4 years and 7 months, and the Westgate Bridge took 10 years. Our government's response will give a clear direction on the major transport projects that will shape our state's future. It will also reflect the reality that many of these major projects will take some years to deliver. Our government has acted decisively by preparing for and responding to population growth. We've restored and rebuilt a transport system that was suffering from significant underinvestment. And at the end of the year, we will take the next step with the release of a new comprehensive transport plan for our state.